I just want you to think about like the worst day your family has ever had. I'm talking like Mario Povich moment or Jerry Springer, however bad it got. But just like the things you said that you're ashamed about, you did or said something very despicable to your family, or you said one of those moments that you wouldn't want caught on camera, right? Where everything went wrong. I just want you to think about that moment. Now just pick that day, imagine it, and now just think of it being reenacted for the whole world to see on 2020 or 60 Minutes or one of those nighttime, news expose shows. Just think about that for a minute. That's what we're seeing here is like the worst, I would assume, the worst day of a family, of everybody doing something wrong, published for the whole world to read in the world's #1 bestseller of all time, for everybody to read from 4,000 years ago till now. It's there. And we're seeing this scene, and as we look at it, you have to remember that God had promised that through Isaac, the promised child would come. So Isaac's born with this expectation that his child's going to be the one who the Messiah would come through. And through him, all the world's nations of the world will be blessed. And so Isaac got married at 40, and he is married for 20 years. And his, I'm assuming, probably very young wife, we don't know how old Rebecca was when they got married, but I'm assuming she was pretty young. For 20 years, she is infertile. No babies, nothing. And she wanted to have a child, of course, and of course that would be the child of promise and everything. So Isaac, what does he do? He prays for his wife, and it's such a beautiful thing. He prays for his wife, and she gets pregnant. But then something's wrong. Something isn't quite right within her stomach, and she's like, there is something serious. And she says, if all is well, why am I thus? Why is this happening to me? And of course, Isaac would probably, he's like, I'm not going to touch that one with a 10-foot pole. I'm not going to answer that question. And she goes and she prays. And I think that's actually, just to think about that for a minute, I remember when Isaiah, my oldest son, was 4 years old, and he was asking Shannon about, Jesus, and she kind of shared the gospel with him in a way a 4-year-old can understand. And so he says, I want to pray, and so she prayed with him. And it wasn't much longer after that he said, if Jesus lives in my heart, then how come I still do bad things? And I think that a lot of times we feel that way. If all is well, why am I thus? And that's kind of how she was feeling. And so she goes to the Lord, she prays, and God says, well, the reason it's this way is because, and this is what God said, he says, 2 nations are in your womb, 2 peoples shall be separated from your body, one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. And so she's given this piece of information. Now, it doesn't tell us, and this is key, it doesn't tell us that she told Isaac. It doesn't say God said this to Isaac, first of all, and it doesn't say that she told this to Isaac. We're assuming that she did. If God speaks to you, and you believe in God, and your husband believes in God, it would be weird not to tell him, right? But it becomes pretty apparent that even though she told her husband this, he doesn't really regard it. He doesn't, she says, the older is going to serve the younger, so the second one born is going to be, and at that time they didn't have ultrasound. They didn't know that there were twins, right? I think that every mom who gets pregnant kind of hopes that she doesn't have twins. It's like, people make those jokes. Oh, I bet it's twins. You're like, no, please no. I don't want twins. Just because, it gets big. And so she's like, whoa, okay, so we're going to have twins. Isaac's like, oy vey, She says the older is going to serve the younger. And, so the younger one's going to be the heir. He's going to be the one of promise. He's going to be the one who receives the promise. And it just doesn't seem like Isaac gives any regard to that. And in a way, good. I think that when it comes to things, sometimes people say that God has spoken to them, and especially when they say that God has spoken to them concerning something that has to do with you. I believe that, God most likely will speak to you if it has to do with you too, right? I think, I don't know if anybody's ever done that to you. Well, I have a word from the Lord from you, and it just does not resonate at all. I would disregard that. Take note of it, but don't take it serious. Usually, if God is speaking to you, He has your address, right? He knows, maybe you're running from the Lord, but this is what I found. When God speaks to you about something concerning you, and somebody comes to you and says, I have a word from the Lord for you, usually the second they say it, with your whole heart that was from the Lord. And if it wasn't, then, people talk out of turn all the time. But she has this thing going on, and she's, hey, I know that God has this heel grabber, this kid that she's going to have named Jacob. He's going to be the leader, and Harry, Esau, is going to be the follower. And as these boys grew, we see a few interesting things. Jacob wanted to be wanted what belonged to his brother. He wanted to be the heir of this promise. He wanted to have the Messiah come through him. He loved that idea, it would seem. Esau, on the other hand, he didn't care about it at all. Now, you have to remember, even if Isaac wasn't a good spiritual mentor to these boys and didn't tell them, hey, this promise means something, this birthright means something, that Abraham did, because these boys were 15 years old when Abraham died. And that's plenty of time to tell them that their family is significant, right? So Esau comes in from the field one day. He's from the hunt. He's hungry, empty-handed, demanding some of Jacob's stew, red stew. And Jacob seizes the opportunity and says, hey, sell me your birthright and I'll give you this bowl of soup. And so Esau, his birthright, and when we talk about his birthright, we remember that his birthright was that he was going to be the heir through whom the Messiah, the Savior of the world, would come. He would be the guy through whom the Savior of the world would come. And he's like, I don't give a rip. So he sells his birthright for a bowl of soup. And this is why the Bible calls Esau a profane man. He didn't care about Christ. He didn't care about the salvation of the world. He didn't care about any of that. He's like, I want to live for myself. Right now, it's a bowl of soup. And so he takes the bowl of soup, eats it, and sells this valuable birthright to his brother for that. And then Esau at 40 married a couple women of the Canaanites, and he upset his parents. They were a grief to Isaac and Rebekah. And so that kind of brings us to where we're at now. In verse 27, or chapter 27, verse 1, it says, Now it came to pass, when Isaac was old and his eyes were so dim that he could not see, that he called Esau his older son and said to him, My son. And he answered him, Here I am. And he said, Behold, now I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now, we know that Isaac is at least 100 years old. At least. And, some people say he's as old as 135, but he's at least 100 years old. And how do we know that? Well, last time we saw Esau, he was 40, getting married, and he was born when Isaac was 60, so that would put Isaac at 60 or 100 years old, and the boys would have been between 40, 50, who knows, somewhere in there. Isaac now has completely gone blind, and it's very likely that, and it's possible that his eyesight going kind of made him feel like maybe this is the end for me, kind of a tragic thing. Maybe he had macular degeneration or something like that, but he's just feeling like, man, life's over, I'm old. And 100 was old. We see them living longer than that, but when Abraham was 100, remember how the Bible described him? It said he was as good as dead. So he's 100 years old. He was as good as dead. And Sarah's womb, also dead. In Romans 4:19 and Hebrews 11 and 12 says the same thing. She had a dead womb. He was a dead man walking, and at 100 years old. And so 100 was still considered to be old. Most people were done having children by that time. And so here's Isaac. He's old. He can't see anymore. And so Isaac is feeling close to death, even though he lived to be 180 years old. And so he's being a little bit dramatic. And we probably all have relatives like that, don't we? They're like your aunt. She's like, I'm probably not going to make it till next year, so I want to see the kids, whatever. But some people are just like that. And so he's being a little bit dramatic. He's, feeling old, feeling scared of death, and he wants to kind of take care of his will, if you will. So verse 3 says, now therefore, please take your weapons. He's talking to Esau. Take your weapons, your quiver, your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me and make me savory food such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, that my soul may be blessed before I die. So he's like right on the edge. I'm going to die any moment. And so hurry and go get me some game so I can enjoy one last pleasure before I kick the bucket. And Isaac wants to be in a good mood as he blesses his son. And in their culture, and especially because of the promises that God has given Isaac, this blessing, he understands, is passing on to his son the promises of Abraham and the promises that he's been given, Isaac, passing them on to Esau, that he would be the heir of the promise, what God has promised their family. And so Esau, no doubt, was excited to have his father bless him. And, he's going to receive a blessing that would, even though that blessing should have gone along with the birthright that he sold his brother. Okay, so there's some stuff into play here. And maybe he didn't tell his father that he'd sold his birthright to his brother, but nonetheless, he's going to receive this blessing. It says, now Rebekah was listening to Isaac when Isaac spoke to Esau his son, and Esau went to the field to hunt game and to bring it. So Rebekah spoke to Jacob her son, saying, indeed I heard your father speak to Esau your brother, saying, and it's going to go on, but I want you to notice something there. Notice it says, Rebekah was listening to Isaac speak to Esau his son. And then it goes on to say, so she spoke to Jacob, her son. And so it's like, that's your son, this is my son. You get Harry, he likes to hunt, he likes to fish, he's out in the field all the time with ticks and stuff and, weeds stuck in it, in his beard. And you can hang out with him, and I'm going to hang out with the smooth boy who hangs out in the house. And, and that's what it says, that Jacob was a plain man or a smooth man. It's just bizarre. And Esau was this hairy guy. And so she's like, you get the ape, I get the gentleman. Anyway, just showing favoritism. And we kind of see this, we saw that with Ishmael and Isaac, and it's almost like they're passing that on, loving one child more than the other. And it's a difficult thing sometimes, isn't it? Sometimes parents do that. And yet I think it can be a symptom of something that is a deeper problem. And I think oftentimes, and I've seen this a lot, doing counseling with people, I've seen this a lot where married people will invest a lot in their children, and almost in a creepy way, their children become surrogates for their spouse. Their spouse should be the one who they love, and how easy it is to love a child, right? How easy it is to just say, hey, my child, I love this child. He comes from me, or, he's part of me, and he's like me, and to love that child, and to loving that child, neglect your spouse. I see it all the time. And it's a sick thing. You know why it's sick? Because you may love your child, and you may want your child to be mommy's boy or daddy's girl or whatever it may be for a long, long period of time. But guess what? That child does not love you that way. And that's why it's a little creepy. You see, you will love your child as much as you love your spouse, and maybe even sometimes a little bit more, but your child can never love you the way that your spouse loves you. And that's a weird thing to figure out, when you're married and all of a sudden you have these kids and all of a sudden they love their spouse more than they love you, because your children never loved you the same way you love them. You would lay your life down for them, but they don't get it. They don't get it until they have kids of their own. Then they realize how much you love them. I remember when I had my son, looking in his eyes thinking, man, my mom loved me this much? Man, I'm horrible. I'm an awful kid. I never loved my mom like I love this kid. And now I look at my kids and I realize they don't love me the same way I love them, And so when it comes to a parent-child relationship, it's very one-sided, but when it comes to a marriage relationship, it's a relationship that can foster love back and forth and become a perfect union. And that's why marriage always has to be the superior relationship in your life if you're married. You cannot ever make the mistake, and if you have, correct it, of putting your kids before your spouse. Your kids have to know that they come second to your spouse. Why? Because if they don't know that, if they're not keenly aware that your spouse is more important, that they're expendable, they can leave, but your spouse can't. If they don't believe that, and I'm not just talking about biological families, but even mixed families. I love him more than I love you. You may have come from my womb. I brought you into this world. I'll take you out, right? But the reality is they are going to leave someday. And if they don't get a good picture of this is unmovable and you are going to leave someday, then they will think wrongly about marriage, and they will go out and they will find the wrong type of mate, and they will make the same mistakes that you made. See, it's so important. If you love them that much, you have to make them second, because that is their place in the world. They're not first to any parent. They can't be. If they are, they will have wrong ideas about boundaries and about marriage and about all kinds of things. And so important. And these kids, of course, are not, they're not being, obviously as we see what comes next, you can see that there's become a rift between Isaac and Rebekah, in the sense that she would be willing to so deeply disrespect her husband because she feels like he's going the wrong direction. Check this out, verse 7. Verse 11. Am I in the wrong verse? Oh, no. Oh, yeah, verse 7. So I was right. Okay. Verse 7, bring me game and make savory food for me, that I may eat it and bless you in the presence of the Lord. This is what Isaac said to Esau. This is Rebekah's repeating it to Jacob. In the presence of the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice according to what I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me there 2 choice kids. This is what Rebekah is telling Jacob to do because of that. 2 choice kids of the goats, and I will make savory food for them for your father, such as he loves. Then you shall take it to your father, that he may eat it, that he may bless you before his death. Now, what is Rebekah doing? She sees that Isaac is not following what she knows the Lord told her. And so she's going to take matters into her own hands. Is this a good idea? No, it's never a good idea. If God said it, God's a big enough boy to be able to handle the details, isn't he? I found that to be true. And I think that we can go a long way because we feel like God has spoken to us or told us something, and we can go out of our way to try to make that a self-fulfilling prophecy by us working really hard to make it happen. And I believe that is a very dangerous place for us to be. If God really told us that he was going to do something, then he is big enough to do it. And I believe that. And, I kind of, in my own life, one of the ways that that's worked out for me is when I felt like God told me I was going to be a pastor at 18. I never did anything other than the obvious. I never did anything to make that happen. So I did take Bible college classes. Okay, that was something I figured I needed to enroll in the Bible college there. But aside from that, I never, told anybody, never asked for ministries. We served in children's ministry, we stacked chairs, we served where we were needed, but I never pushed, said, hey, I'm going to be a pastor, so, hey, Pastor Bob, when you're not speaking someday, you should let me fill the pulpit. Never did that. Never even asked to speak anywhere. I actually, we were serving in children's ministry. We stopped serving in children's ministry for a while. We were asked to come back. Next thing you know, we were running the children's ministry because everybody quit and we were like the last ones left. And then Pastor Bob said, I want to do, he told Dan Davis, Pastor Dan, who's now the pastor at Calvary Mountain Home, he said, I want to do a internship. You find me the guys who are serving in this church and I want them to be my interns. Guess what? I was asked, just because I was serving in a position that I didn't ask for. And now I'm in an internship, and next thing you know, I'm being sent out to Emmett to plant a church. It's just the way the Lord did it. I never asked for it. I never pushed my way in. And I think it's important that as Christians, if we're going to follow God's will, we let Him open those doors. We see what God's doing, and we get involved in that and let Him fulfill the prophecy that He has for our lives, rather than trying to push into it and trying to make it happen. And it's going to happen either way. If it's God, it's going to happen either way. But how would you rather it happen? Would you rather it happen with a clean conscience and saying, only God can explain this? Or would you rather it be like, well, I, made it here. Well, was it God or was it me? When it comes right down to it, we want it to be God, right? And to believe it was God. And so what she does here is she completely circumvents her husband. And this is a very disrespectful thing to do. She basically tells her son, go down, get these goats. I'm going to make them up. She's obviously a good cook because she can make goats taste like venison, right? I'm going to cook them up. They're going to taste like the savory meat your dad loves, and you're going to go in and trick him. That he would bless you instead of his brother before his death. And this just shows me that Rebecca is willing to do this. She's looking at her husband and she's saying, I told him that Jacob was the one who was supposed to be the leader, and he ignored it, and he's not following God, and so I have to do my own thing. And that's also a dangerous place to be. Let God handle it, right? I mean, Sarah could have done the same thing. She could have been like, you know what? Heck with you. You think you're God's man? You want me to go down to Egypt with you? Forget about it. She could have done that. But she didn't. She let the Lord take care of it, right? So God blessed her and blessed both of them. And Rebecca is going to pay for this as it moves forward. So verse 11, it says, and Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, look, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth-skinned man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem as a deceiver to him, and I shall bring a curse upon myself and not a blessing. It kind of cracks me up to think about this. I'm clean cut. He's more Duck Dynasty. I like to shave. He likes to, grow wild. But notice the language. He says, I will seem as a deceiver. You are a deceiver. Are you kidding me? Seem? It's interesting. He's not worried about being a liar. He's worried about being known as a liar. He's not worried about deceiving his father as long as he doesn't get caught. Isn't that amazing? And that's the truth for most people, honestly. It's like, just think about it in your own mind. What are the things that I would allow myself to do if I knew I wasn't going to get caught? Just confession time. There are movies that I won't watch just because I want to be able to say no when somebody asks me, have you seen this movie? I just want to be able to say no, I don't want to have to, tell yeah, I saw that, darn it. There's movies that I probably would normally watch, if I didn't have any accountability, just because that's the way people are. You just allow yourself to watch things you probably shouldn't. But I just want to be able to say no. And so it's more of a pride thing, I suppose, than it is true conviction. You think about that? But that's kind of like, he's like, I don't want to be caught. I just want to be able to be known as an upstanding guy. But how can he not be known as a deceiver? They obviously haven't thought this whole thing through. But his mother said to him, let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go get them for me. And I'll take the blame. I will get cursed instead of you. And she will, in a sense, because what's going to happen to Rebekah is her son is going to be sent away, and she'll never see him again. She's going to die before he ever comes back. And so pretty intense penalty for lying to your husband. Verse 14, it says, and he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory food such as his father loved. And Rebekah took the choice clothes of her elder son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And she put skins of the kids, or the goats, on his hands and on the smooth parts of his neck. So she makes the food, sews together some gloves and a goatskin scarf for her son, dresses him up. Jacob is at least 40 years old. Now, he could be, some commentators say he could be as old as 70. It's possible. But the reality is he's an older guy, a bachelor, hanging out with mama still doing what mama says. It just smacks of William Bates. It's such a weird thing. Anyway, she's dressing him up so that he can go deceive his father. Just so many things wrong with this. I don't even know where to begin. But he must have looked just ridiculous. You think about how this guy looked. He has like goat skins strapped to his body, gloves on. And she gave him the savory food and the bread which she had prepared into the hand of her son Jacob. So he went to his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am. And he says, who are you, my son? Now, one explanation is that Isaac, maybe he was, he's getting older, his eyes are going, maybe he's slipping mentally a little bit at this time. And maybe they knew they could fool him if they put just a little bit of effort into it. But it says, verse 19, Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done just as you told me. Please arise, sit and eat my game, that your soul may bless me. So he's like, goes in, opens the door. Who's there? It's Esau. It's Esau. It's Esau, your firstborn. He's obviously the smooth guy, not the hairy guy, right? He's talking. He sounds different. But Isaac said to his son, how is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? So you can tell he's suspicious. And he said, because the Lord, your God, brought it to me. So he brings God into his lie. It's crazy. I was watching one of those things you don't want to admit you watch. The other day I was watching one of those late night, I don't remember which one it was, who the guy's name is, but we were watching one of those late night things, and they had Lie Witness News. Have you seen this? Anyway, so they were out on the street interviewing people about President Obama's State of the Union, and it actually aired that night. It hadn't aired yet. And so they were asking people, did you watch the State of the Union? And you wouldn't believe it. These people were like, oh yeah, I watched it. And like, who did you watch it with? And they like start naming people that they watched it with, like, oh, I watched it with my coworkers. Well, where did you watch it? Oh, at my apartment. And he just, like, people were just saying this stupid stuff. And then, like, what did you think when President Obama lit a cigarette at the end? And, his supporters were like, well, I thought it was kind of cool because, he's just being funny. And other people were like, I think it's ridiculous. And, but they didn't watch it. They're lying. They're like totally lying to this camera person on TV, just making it up as they go along. Here, Jacob's doing the same thing. He's saying, I'm your firstborn. God brought the meat to me. Verse 21, Isaac said to Jacob, please come near that I may feel you, my son. That's weird. Whether you are really my son Esau or not. And you'd think he'd be like, just kidding, Dad. It's just me, Jacob. I was just teasing you, whatever. But he's going through it. So Jacob went near to Isaac, his father, and he felt him and said, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So he feels the goat skin. I just can't imagine. I don't know. I used to have goats. I don't know if you've ever had goats, but their hair is really thick and coarse. I can't imagine how hairy this Esau guy must have been. He had some sort of disease or something. Guy was Wolfman Jack. Verse 23, and he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him, and he said, are you really my son Esau? He said, I am. So he completely lies. I just want you to pause for a moment. And here's a very sinister and fleshly thing going on. I mean, this is like, could you imagine if this is going on in your family? Your kids completely just deceive you. Anybody ever experienced that? Your kids just completely lie to your face? Yeah, mine too. Well, here Jacob, and he's older. It's not like he's just a little kid or something like that. He's at least 40 years old. And here he is completely deceiving his father, and yet God is going to bless him in spite of it. And that is something that we just have to think about for a minute. God realizes, he understands that every family in the world is messed up. And I don't care what family you come from. I don't care how dedicated you think you are. Every family in the world has problems. And we think it's such a strange thing, and we're so shocked when news comes out if something bad has happened or somebody did something and it's just like, heartbreaking. And yet the reality is we're all capable. I believe this with all my heart. Every single one of us is capable of anything given the right circumstances. Given the right situation, every single one of us is capable of just about anything. And that's sad. But the reality is God's grace is bigger than that. And that's the beautiful thing. So even though Jacob is so messed up, God is still going to take his life, still going to use it, still going to bless him. So what does that mean in terms of our lives? It means that God loves us, that his grace is sufficient for us, and that he wants to bless us. It doesn't matter what you've done or where you've been. His forgiveness is big enough. I mean, look at this. I don't think it's illustrated anywhere in the Bible better than in John chapter 8, when Jesus is there in the temple and he's kind of kneeling down. It says he's writing in the dust of the ground with his finger on the temple floor, in the temple court. And as he's writing with the dust, it says they brought before him a woman caught in the very act of adultery. Here's a woman caught in the very act of adultery. And they say, what shall, Moses says, this is what they say, Moses says that she should be stoned. What do you say? And he stands up, looks at the men. They're standing there with stones in their hands. And he says, let he who is without sin among you cast the first stone. And then he goes back down and he starts writing in the dust with his finger again. Let him who is without sin among you cast the first stone. So here are these religious leaders, these religious people who have got this woman and wanting, more to trick Jesus, more to catch Jesus, to show that he's unmerciful or that he's breaking the law. They thought they had him. And he comes with just such a simple solution. Let the perfect one stand up first and be the first one to cast blame. And then he goes back down and starts writing again with his finger. I wonder what he was writing, It's like he's listing their names. Starts writing their sins next to their name, maybe. I don't know. It's hard to say. But the reality is God's grace is huge. And so when all these people, it says they just began to leave, from the oldest to the youngest. The oldest have more sins than the youngest, I guess. And as they're leaving, Jesus is standing there alone with this adulterous woman. And he looks at her and he says, "Where are your accusers?" And she says, "I have none, Lord." And he says, "Neither do I condemn you." But then he says something very important. He says, "Go and sin no more." God wants to forgive us of our sin, but he doesn't want us to continue in it, does he? He wants us to be free from it. Because honestly, when we continue in sin, after we have confessed it and after we've given it to the Lord and we say, "Lord, I want to be free from this," after we've been forgiven of sin, why would we want to put anything between us and the one who forgave us? Because I guarantee you, he won't put anything there. He's not going to put anything in the way of a relationship with you. But we oftentimes pile stones in there, don't we? And that's kind of what Jacob has done. That's what Rebekah has done. It could have been such a beautiful thing as God worked out this impossible circumstance. Don't you see that in your life, that God brings an impossible circumstance? And it's like, I know God told me this, but this is what's happened. And it seems to be the opposite of what I felt God told me. And yet, in that moment, when you just said, "You know what, I'm just going to trust the Lord. I believe that he's going to work it out." It is amazing how he can just turn it at the last second and bring about his deliverance. Do you realize that there was a moment in Jewish history when the Jews, because of Rome, every culture, whether it was Egypt, whether it was Assyria, it didn't matter who was ruling the world, when they conquered Israel, they made them a vassal, meaning a subsidiary kingdom, but they always allowed them to execute judgment upon their own people, to capitally punish somebody who'd broken the Jewish laws, which was the punishment for a lot of the breaking of the Jewish laws, until Rome. Rome comes in. Early on, the Caesar comes in, takes the area of Israel, and they take away their right for capital punishment. When they did that, the scepter of Judah had been violated. The law, in their mind, had been broken because it says in Genesis chapter 49 that the scepter will not depart from Judah until Shiloh comes, until the Messiah comes. When the Messiah comes, the Messiah will come before anybody takes the power of Judah away to rule. And what they believed when Rome came in was that the scepter has departed, Shiloh has not come. They ripped their clothes, cried Ichabod, the glory has departed. And they put ashes on their head and they walked through the streets mourning because the law had been broken. What they didn't know was in the little town of Bethlehem, just a few years before, maybe 2 years before, a little baby was born who was Shiloh. They should have, instead of tearing their clothes and mourning, they should have said, "The Messiah is here. He's here somewhere." Because the scepter wouldn't have departed unless the Messiah was here. God always, I don't know, it's almost like He loves making it impossible so that when He comes through at the end, we can only give credit to Him. And I think it's true in our lives as well. And yet, oftentimes, we derail that, don't we? There's been several times when Shannon and I were, it was just a part of our life early on when we started the church where the Lord just kind of prescribed that we were just going to live by faith. We basically had no income. We had I had a business that I was running. It was doing really well when I first started it, but then I got busier and busier at the church. And so we just started praying for our needs. And what was amazing is about an 8-month period, we would just pray every time we had a need. And God would he would come through, just in miraculous ways, but oftentimes it was like at the last second. It was like at 11:59, right, when he came. Or sometimes it was a few hours past what we thought was the deadline, but then it ended up not being the deadline. It's just like that's the way the Lord always seemed to work. And yet, before we started to learn to live that way, that to trust God to the last second, meaning if God doesn't come through, we're going to crash and burn. But we're serving him, so we believed, hey, we're serving you, Jesus. We know you're going to take care of us. And before that, what we did was we got close. Okay, well, how are we going to shift things around? Okay, how are we going to get put it on the credit card? Do something. We always figured it out. And guess what? When we figured it out ourselves, we got in a lot of debt, and God never came through for us. Why didn't he come through for us? Because we didn't wait for him. We didn't allow him to come through. We always bailed ourselves out. And I guarantee you, God will let you bail yourself out. He'll let you bail yourself out and bail yourself out and bail yourself out and bail yourself out until all of your pails are gone. And you can't bail yourself out anymore. Or until you just say, you know what, God, I'm not going to bail myself out. I'm going to trust you. I believe, and maybe you need to repent. That's sometimes we had to repent. Like, okay, God, we spent all of our money on, Twinkies this month. Not really, but, on whatever. We spent all our money on foolish things, and now we don't have enough. Lord, please forgive me for not being more responsible. I need your help. And we would repent. But then even if it was our fault, oftentimes, and it wasn't always our fault, but a lot of times it was. Even if it wasn't our fault, God would still help us. But, think about that. When you have your own children, right? If they come to you and say, Daddy, I messed this, I broke the hose, sorry, will you put a new hose on for me? As parents, we might be a little frustrated, but we're going to help them if they confess their sin, right? We're going to forgive them quickly. It's when they try to hide it, when they try to fix it themselves, when they get the new hose themselves and put it on wrong and strip the threads and put the other one in the garage and stuff it underneath the lawnmower. And then you go turn the lawnmower on and boom, and that's when they're in trouble. That's, and it's the same with us. Same with us. It's God is working to teach us to trust him. And sometimes the difficult circumstances come because he wants us to trust him. So, regardless, he says, yes, I'm Esau. And he's just lying. He says, I am. Verse 25, he said, bring it near to me, and I will eat my son's game. I'm in verse 25. So that my soul may bless you. So he brought it near to him, and he ate. And he brought him wine, and he drank. And his father Isaac said to him, come near now, and kiss me, my son. And he came near and kissed him, and he smelled the smell of the clothing. And so just before we get to the blessing, hearing the word, he sensed something was wrong. Remember? I'm Esau, your firstborn. Wait. It's the voice of Isaac. He heard the word. He sensed something was wrong. He had discernment about the word. But then he feels Esau. He feels like Esau. The food tastes like Esau's food. He smells like Esau. What big eyes you have, right? It's like he goes after his senses and he ignores the word that he hears, which is obviously the voice of Jacob and not the voice of Esau. But he ignores that because he feels him. And I think we're no different. We see the word, we hear the word of God, and yet we feel something else. Oh, this isn't right. This is better. This is going to satisfy me. This is better for me. And we ignore the word and go with our feelings. I think that oftentimes people, last week it was interesting. I got some reports. I don't know if you were here Sunday. We went through Romans chapter 1, and I was very careful to just allow the Bible to speak for itself and to be instructing on us as Christians how we should be towards people who are homosexual or whatever. But I just let the Bible, say the things it needed to say about that whole thing. And I didn't want to add a whole lot of commentary to that because I wanted it to be, if anybody was offended, I wanted them to be offended by what the Bible said and not by what I said. And, I talked to people and they said, I thought you handled that so well. I thought you handled that so well. I talked to someone else and they said, well, all they heard was, you don't like homosexuals, and that's the only thing they heard. And I didn't even say that, but that's all they heard because they were offended by the word. They couldn't, even though the Bible clearly says it, they were upset with me because, and I warned them. I put the thing up, it said escape. I said, here's your chance. If you're new here today, you might want to escape. And then I said, there's something here to offend all of us. And it wasn't just that, was it? Extortioners, liars, deceivers, fornicators. I mean, everything was there, and we're all like, oh. We were all guilty. And yet, some people are offended by the word. They're offended by the word. They don't want to believe what they're hearing. They don't want to discern it. And Isaac wasn't discerning either. And he blessed him. There, verse 27, second part. He blessed him and said, surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven, of the fatness of the earth, and plenty of grain and wine. Let peoples serve you, and nations bow to you. Be masters over your brethren, and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you. So the first thing he says, you smell like a field. I remember when I was a kid, we used to drive to Buell from Pocatello, where I grew up. We'd drive to Buell to see my grandparents several times during the summer, but it was a 2-hour drive, so it was like an eternity. And I remember driving about, I don't know, a little ways, past Raft River and, get towards Twin, and you roll down your windows, and what do you smell? You smell Idaho's fresh dairy air, right? Just that meadow muffin smell. That's what he's telling him. You smell like a meadow muffin, You smell like the field which the Lord has blessed. What he's doing here is he's blessing him, something that God would do to him or in his life, but on a greater scope, he's speaking of the way that God is going to bless Israel. And so the first thing he says, the first part of his blessing, is that he's going to prosper him. And that's the same thing that God has done for Abraham. Remember, Abraham was blessed, and he had herds and flocks and camels and goats and men servants and maid servants, and he had all of that possession. And then, of course, Isaac as well. Isaac, in a time of drought, planted a field, planted and reaped 100-fold, and became great, and he had, herds and flocks, and, because God was blessing him. And so basically the same blessing, this prosperity, is going to be passed on to Jacob, but then on a greater scale, it would be passed on to Israel. And this is really interesting because, you see in the world today, even because, the people, the Jewish people, especially during World War II, were kind of blocked out of a lot of service trades because of their ethnicity, and because of that, a lot of them went into banking. They went into investments because they couldn't have a cobbler shop because nobody would support it, or it was kind of looked down on. And so they took all their money and they started to use their money in investments and properties and things like that because they couldn't open a store. They couldn't work in a store. And so because of that forced push towards that economy class, business class, they started to invest, and they became, very, very wealthy. A lot of the Jewish people became very, very wealthy because of discrimination, which is interesting. But then you look at the nation of Israel, and they're an anomaly. Here they are. They go in to the Middle East. After Second World War, God was very, very gracious to them in that He gave sympathy for the Jewish nation for a very small window of time. And I can't remember the guy's name now. I wanted to say Gutenberg, but that's not right. The guy who went in and started to colonize Israel, they went in, they got investors together, and they purchased, for a high price, they purchased the land of Israel. Now that's something a lot of people don't realize today, is that they didn't go in and drive everybody out, but they went in and bought the land. Now what they told the inhabitants of the land, which were the Palestinians, a lot of them were Jews, but some of them were Arabs, and some of them were, Persian people, just all kinds of different people living there. They told them, we want you to stay. You can stay here, you can have your house, you can whatever. And they purchased the land, they moved in, they were weak, and not long after they moved in, the nations around them, hating that Israel was there because they're all Islamic, they hated that Israel was there. They went in to attack them, and miraculously, God protected them. And they got the Russians involved, and the Russians came down to attack them, and they drove them out, and somehow, when they pushed them back so far, that they found stashes of Russian military equipment, tanks, missiles, all kinds of stuff, and they were able to reinforce their military and then build from there. And now, today, in our world, where Israel's sitting with all these oil-rich nations around them, and here they are, just this tiny, smaller than the state of New Jersey, this little piece of land, they have the most advanced military in the entire world. It's miraculous. I mean, there's no reason Israel should be there. They've had so many wars, the 6-Day War, or the 7-Day War, 7th-Day War, whatever it was. All these different attacks that these nations have come against them, and God has protected them and preserved them supernaturally every time. And it just blows your mind to think that they're still there, yet God still is prospering them, even though they're in unbelief. It's the same thing we see here. Here's Jacob. He completely is ignoring the fact that God should be the one who's making this happen. And he's going after it himself, and he's being prospered in spite of his unbelief. And that's how Israel is today. We know from Bible prophecy that in the last days, all of Israel will be saved. He has promises that he still has to the children of Israel. And in the last days, they'll be saved. But you see, this prosperity isn't just to Jacob. It's going to pass on to his children and his children's children, and even unto today. Second blessing is of power. And this will be true of Jacob's life ultimately. When Christ reigns, he will reign as a Jewish king on the throne of David. And the Jewish nation will be reestablished, and he will be over the world. But the primary people who make it into the millennial kingdom will be under the reign of the Son of David, Jesus, who will rule and reign. We will rule and reign with him, those of us who are Christians. Second, he's going to give him power. And third, he is going to bless him with the Messiah. All the nations of the world will be blessed. I'm going to bless those who bless you. I'm going to curse those who curse you. And through you, through your seed, all the nations of the world will be blessed. Of course, this was the promise that was given to Abraham. And this is passed down to Isaac. And now Isaac is verbally blessing Jacob, who he thinks is Esau, with this same blessing. Verse 30, now it happened as soon as Isaac had finished, in verse 30, as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. And did they think that he would never come back? I mean, surely your sin will find you out. I don't know what they were thinking, like, oh, well, Esau will never know. No, he's going to know. he also made very savory food and brought it to his father and said to his father, let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that your soul may bless me. And his father Isaac said to him, who are you? So he said, I am your son, your firstborn Esau. Who are you? He's like, what in the world? He recognizes the voice now, doesn't he? Then Isaac trembled exceedingly and said, who? Where is the one who hunted game and brought it to me? I ate all of it before you came, and I have blessed him, and indeed he shall be blessed. You see, when Isaac was speaking, and I think that he's having what they call a moment of clarity. When he was speaking, he knew that the Lord's Spirit was upon him. He knew he was prophesying over his son, thinking it was Esau, and knowing that the Lord was speaking through. I don't know if you've ever been in that place where you just know the Lord's speaking through you. You can just feel it. You just sense that the Lord is speaking. And that's what he was feeling. And he knew that he was blessing his son. He's like, Rebecca is so wrong. Rebecca thought she had it. She was so wrong. Oops. Now he's having a moment of clarity. Wait a minute. I was going to give the blessing to my son Esau. Rebecca told me. I knew that was from the Lord, even though I didn't want to believe it, because I loved the hairy boy more than I liked the smooth boy. I loved that he was a hunter like me. I loved that he was a stud muffin. And now this smooth mama's boy is the one who has the blessing. I think he's just having this moment of clarity, and he realizes what's happened. Not only has his son deceived him, but he ignored the word that Rebekah had spoken to him. And Jacob would rule and be greater than Esau. And he didn't want to believe it. But now he probably feels a little bit responsible because he didn't pay attention or more closely to the Lord. Verse 34, when Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with an exceeding great and bitter cry. And he said to his father, bless me also, O my father. But he said, your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing. It's pretty intense. Now, why would God allow all this to happen? Well, first of all, God gives us free will. We can do what we want to do, and that's the bad news. God allows us to make mistakes. And yet, it says in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15, look carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, by this many become defiled, lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, for one morsel of food sold his birthright. For you know that afterwards, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently with tears. He rejected it, rejected Christ, didn't want anything to do with it, and yet wanted the blessing. And I think oftentimes that's what we want in our life. I want to do whatever I want to do, but I want to be blessed. And it doesn't always work that way, right? I think oftentimes we have to realize that we're blessed when we follow Jesus. And when we follow our own path and do our own thing, it just brings heartache and despair. We may get what we want, but oftentimes isn't getting what you want like the worst thing? Isn't it crazy how that's true? The Chinese actually have a proverb. It's a curse. May you live in interesting times, and may you get what you want. It's a Chinese curse. Verse 36, it says, and Esau said, he is not rightly named Jacob, or is he not rightly named Jacob? For he supplanted me these 2 times. So his word means to catch somebody's heel. Jacob does. Is he not rightly named heel catcher? He took away my birthright. Now, look, he has taken away my blessing. And he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? Interesting perspective. I have a son who gets mad at me whenever I discipline him. He blames me. He tells me he hates me when I discipline him for something he did. Like, he broke something that was somebody else's. And so, it's just kind of that, all about me attitude. And of course he's young. He'll grow out of it, hopefully. Verse 37. Then Isaac answered and said to Esau, Indeed, I have made him your master, and all his brethren I have given to him as servants. With grain and wine I have sustained him. What shall I do now for you, my son? And Esau said to his father, Have you only one blessing, my father? Bless me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice again and wept. Then Isaac his father answered and said to him, Behold, your dwelling shall be with the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven above. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass that when you become restless, that you shall break his yoke from your neck. So interesting blessing. Not really a blessing, other than you will prosper with fat cattle, watered crops. It's kind of the idea there. But you're going to have to fight for it. You're going to live by your sword, which means you're going to have to fight people off. You're going to have to battle. And you're going to be a slave to your brother. And someday you're going to break that bondage you have to him. Not a great blessing, if you think about it. So Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing which his father had blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, The days of mourning for my father are at hand, and I will kill my brother Jacob. And so I'm going to wait till my father dies. He looks like he's about dead now. And when he's dead, I'm going to kill Jacob. And this is what it's talking about in Hebrews chapter 12 when it talks about bitterness. Because not only did Jacob have a failed expectation, but his failed expectation was because he felt like he was wronged by his brother. And, when we hold on to bitterness, when we hold on to that, won't let go of it, then God, allows it to destroy us. And that's a scary thing. We would say, oh, he's rightly so angry. He deceived and stole his blessing. But it doesn't matter. I mean, somebody could wrong you, and even though it was completely evil what they did to you, bitterness and unforgiveness will destroy you. And that's a sad truth. We have to learn as Christians to forgive like Jesus forgave. And oftentimes it's not just something like, okay, I'm just going to forgive. Oftentimes we have to go to Jesus and say, I confess this unforgiveness as falling short of your standard, your glory, and I need you to put forgiveness in my heart for the person who has wronged me. And what we find happens when we do that, when we say, Jesus, I need your forgiveness for this person. I need you to forgive them through me. And then we act out on that. Maybe say, hey, I forgive you to somebody, or maybe in our heart, if they're gone or can't get to them, to say, hey, I forgive, I give this over to God. I release the responsibility of being angry anymore or bitter against this person anymore. What happens is it frees you from the bondage of that bitterness. Because what bitterness does to you is it just allows what they did to continue to hurt you. That's all it does. As has been said, being bitter is like drinking poison and hoping the other person's going to die. It doesn't solve anything. And so to just take it to the Lord and say, Jesus, I know this is just destroying my life. It's amazing how quickly I've seen people who are bitter and angry and holding on to pain let go of it and just be set free. That person can no longer control my life. How do I know if I'm bitter? Bitterness remembers details. When they said this and when I did that and then they did, it remembers details. Bitterness does. So if you can remember, you can't remember your anniversary, or you can't remember your honeymoon, you can't remember good things, but you can remember every word that was spoken in that conversation or everything that was done in that moment. You're bitter. And confess it to the Lord. Say, Lord, this falls short of your glory and I need you to heal me of this. He says, beware lest the root of bitterness comes in and defiles many. Anyway, need to move forward. Verse 42, and the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah, so she sent Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, surely your brother Esau comforts himself concerning you by intending to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to my brother Laban in Haran, and stay with him a few days until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have said to him. Then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereaved of you both in one day? And so she says, if he kills you, he's going to, be in trouble. I'll lose him and you in the same day. And Rebekah said to Isaac, I am weary of my life because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob takes a wife of the daughters of Heth like these, who are the daughters of the land, what good will my life be to me? Now, remember, the daughters of Heth, the Canaanite women, were the ones that Esau married. And she's like, I can't stand my daughters-in-law. Don't let Jacob marry into these women. They're driving me crazy. I might as well kill myself if you allow Isaac or you allow Jacob to marry one of these. And so, of course, Isaac will send Jacob away. And Jacob will go away. He'll be gone for 21 years. And he comes back when he hears that his mother has died. And so very sad, she never sees him again. And that's kind of what happened in response to her disrespecting her husband, in response to her sin. She lost the one thing that was the most important to her, which is really sad. But anyway.